In this video, we'll be talking about how to build a world with words, selecting and highlighting specific details and descriptions to create a unique atmosphere that is not only realistic, but also imparts to your reader a sense of emotional significance. Whenever you're creating a new world, even if it's something that's built upon an already existing experience or setting, you're always bringing something new into the universe. This quote from William Shakespeare represents this pretty well. Shakespeare writes, "And as imagination bodies forth the forms of things unknown, the poet's pen turns them to shapes and gives to airy nothing a local habitation and a name." When you're bodying forth or creating a world, you're basically building it from the ground up. So you're going to have to consider a lot of different elements. These include naming, detailing, sensory description, and comparing. Naming is essentially listing all of those important nouns, whether they are people, objects, places, or specific features of those places, people, and objects. Detailing includes modifying or describing the specific qualities of those objects. And sensory description is just focusing on those physical qualities that you would experience with your senses: sight, sound, smell, and touch. And taste is also one of those that you might not want to forget, especially if you're writing about food. And lastly, adding comparisons. These are similes or metaphors where you compare an object from your description to something entirely different adds meaning because it not only imparts the qualities of the second object on the first, but it also helps readers better understand something they're unfamiliar with by comparing it with something they might be more familiar with. So rather than just lecture on how to do these things, I'm going to show you how a very, very skilled writer by the name of Gustave Flaubert does these exact same things in his novel, Madame Bovary. Madame Bovary is a novel about a woman named Emma who marries a provincial or country doctor in France. She really isn't happy about being out in the provinces. She misses the city, and she's pretty bummed about the whole situation, to say the least. Here's an excerpt from Madame Bovary when Emma first arrives at Charles' house after they were married. I'm going to read it all the first time, but I'm not going to be reading everything over the course of the slideshow. Bovary's house, with its brick front, was just in a line with the street, or rather the road. Behind the door hung a cloak with a small collar, a bridle, and a black leather cap, and on the floor in a corner were a pair of leggings, still covered with dry mud. On the right was the one apartment that was both dining and sitting room. A canary yellow paper, relieved at the top by a garland of pale flowers, was puckered everywhere over the badly stretched canvas. White calico curtains with a red border hung crossways at the length of the window, and on the narrow mantelpiece a clock with a head of Hippocrates shone resplendent between two plate candlesticks under oval shades. On the other side of the passage was Charles' consulting room, a little room about 6 paces wide, with a table, 3 chairs, and an office chair. Volumes of the Dictionary of Medical Science uncut, but the binding rather the worse for the successive sales through which they had gone, occupied almost alone the 6 shelves of a deal bookcase. The smell of melted butter penetrated through the walls when he saw patients, just as in the kitchen one could hear people in the consulting room coughing and recounting their whole histories. So now we see the same paragraph, but this time all of the names or nouns have been highlighted in orange. House, front, street, door, cloak, bridle, cap. Leggings, mud, apartment, room, paper, canvas, curtains, window. As you can see, by simply naming these things out loud, you already get an idea of what this setting looks like, just through its nouns. So here you see on top of the orange names, some green details that modify those names, creating a more particularized understanding of both those objects and that world. Some of them are short, like for instance, brick, one word, modifies front, Others are quite long. For instance, both dining and sitting room modifies the word apartment. In this way, you don't just have to use single word adjectives and adverbs to help you describe things. You can have whole phrases that help the reader understand more about what you're describing. Sensory description is part of detailing, but most of the time when we're talking about detailing, we're thinking about visuals, visual senses. So it usually relies on the sense of sight. Here you can see the whole first yellow chunk of the paragraph is all about sight details. But Flaubert is a master craftsman. He doesn't just rely on the sense of sight, and neither should you. You can see here that even though they're small, he includes some other details as well. The smell of melted butter, that's the sense of smell. And just as in the kitchen, one could hear people in the consulting room coughing and recounting their whole histories, that's the sense of sound. So thus far, the kind of description we've been talking about has been pretty straightforward. Now we're going to get into something a little more complicated called figurative language. You might have heard of the phrases simile and metaphor in other English classes, and we're going to learn how to concoct similes and metaphors, which aren't always the easiest thing to do, but are really, really helpful at expanding the experience for your reader. Here's an example from Madame Bovary. From Emma's perspective, this is a simile, which is a comparison using like or as. This one uses the word as to compare how certain places on earth bring happiness, just like plants need peculiar or particular soil and can't thrive in the wrong kind of soil. In other words, Emma needs a specific place in order to thrive. Here's another example of a simile comparison using like or as, which unflatteringly compares Charles to a child with his napkin tied around his neck. And here's one final example of both a simile and a metaphor. The simile, her life was as cold as a garret whose dormer window looks on the north. Brr, that sounds cold. And the metaphor compares ennui, which is another word for boredom, implicitly without the words like or as, to a spider, the silent spider, weaving its web in the darkness in every corner of her heart. You can already tell from many of these that the author, Flaubert, isn't trying to just describe stuff, but he's creating what is often referred to as a dominant impression. This is a mood or atmosphere that reinforces the writer's purpose. All descriptive choices come together to create this effect, and writers both comment directly in description and let description speak for itself. So let's take a look at the dominant impression of the paragraph we read a little bit ago. So we see here, starting with the fact that the house, it's not on a street, it's rather a road, not quite as fancy. The Lagans, they're still covered with dry mud. The apartment has to be both a sitting and dining room. We have puckered canary yellow wallpaper. We have a little tiny consulting room. Those volumes of the Dictionary of Medical Science are uncut. They've never been opened, but even so, they look a little worse for the wear. And the fact that you're smelling butter through the walls in the consulting room and in the kitchen you're hearing coughing, that leaves kind of a nasty impression. This is a provincial doctor's office. It's nothing fancy, and it seems a little bit drab. And Flaubert doesn't just do this sort of thing with his straightforward description. He really brings it home when he has his figurative language, those similes and metaphors. So here's an example. The flat country stretched as far as the eye could see, and the tufts of trees round the farms at long intervals seemed like dark violet stains on the cast gray surface that on the horizon faded into the gloom of the sky. This is not a beautiful landscape, it's a pretty gloomy one. And let's just quickly revisit my absolute favorite one. I like this one because Flaubert isn't just telling us how Emma is feeling, but he's also using his beautiful figurative language to really show it through description. In town, with the noise of the streets, the buzz of the theaters, and the lights of the ballroom, they were living lives where the heart expands, the senses burgeon out. But she, her life was cold as a garret whose dormer window looks on the north, and ennui, the silent spider, was weaving its web in the darkness in every corner of her heart.